So today I'm really excited to share with you my first ever pattern from French Meadows. This pattern is for my classic puff sleeve chemise, which looks like this. This is a great foundation for any Renaissance Fair costume. It's also great for a nightgown if you just want to sleep in it. It's so comfortable depending on what kind of fabric you use. And I have made this pattern before in all sorts of fabrics, whether it be something more historically accurate like this linen fabric. You could do it in cotton. Other fabrics that I've made this in are chiffon, so you can make more of a like sheer ethereal fairy type look with this pattern. And the pattern is designed so that you can make it either with this ruffle neckline or you can make it without the ruffle neckline and just do a simple elastic. But I love this pattern because it's really easy to get a good fit on it. It has a lot of fabric in it. This is a size small medium, so as you can see there's quite a lot of room in there. And it's supposed to be loose and flowy like that. It's based on the fit of like historical chemises and undergarments. This is also super adjustable to your size. All you need to know is 2 measurements for your elastic measurements, so you can get a really comfortable fit which still makes like a nice puff sleeve shape, makes this delicate, lovely little ruffle on the neckline, and you can wear this on or off the shoulders depending on what look you're going for, and it's really just a versatile piece. So I think this is a pattern you'll definitely want to add to your collection. So the pattern is for sale on my website. People on my Patreon get a big discount, so if you're interested in my Patreon, be sure to sign up for that. On there I have a lot of different sewing tutorials. I have a Discord where you can ask me questions directly about the pattern and about any sewing projects you have. You can also chat with other people in our community and share about the projects that you're working on and your progress, and it's really just a great place to get together for people that love sewing. So if you're interested in that, be sure to sign up and you'll get a discount on the pattern for this. The pattern will be linked in the description here as well if you want to purchase it, and in this video I'm going to show you how to put it together. The pattern is available to be printed either at home, or you can also take it to a printing place like Staples, which I recommend because it is a pretty big pattern, so there are a lot of pieces to put together. If you've ever done a home printed pattern, then you know that taping the pieces together can be a bit of a task. This one in particular has 45 pages, so I've got a lot of taping to do, so I'm going to get started on that.
To align your pattern pieces, simply put them right next to each other. No need to overlap or anything, and there's going to be these parts where your printer probably doesn't print that far that are missing, but if you just align the pieces exactly together, then it should all fit perfectly.
So when you've got that all cut out, you should have 2 pattern pieces, your dress pattern and your sleeve pattern. So the great thing about this dress is that the front and the back pieces are exactly the same and the sleeve pieces are exactly the same. So you just need to cut 2 of these and then 2 of these, and then that's all you need to do for cutting. The front and back of the dress are exactly the same, so you don't really need to worry about which way it goes. It's really simple to put together. And your sleeve will basically go right here, and it'll be like that, one on each side, and then you'll put some elastic here and some elastic in the sleeve, and that's pretty much it.
So this was my first time having a pattern made, so there are a couple of errors on the pattern that are worth pointing out. Or not really errors, just places where the printing just doesn't totally work if you're doing the at-home printing. So at least on the small medium size for the sleeve, right here the words are cut off, but it should say cut here for no ruffle or fold here for ruffle neckline. Here it should say fold here for simple neckline, and here it should say elastic casing. And it's the same thing on the dress piece. The words are a little bit cut off here, but they should say exactly the same thing as they did on the sleeve pattern.
So a few things worth pointing out on this pattern.
On the neckline, you have two different options, whether you want to have a ruffle neckline or not a ruffle neckline. You can either fold the pattern here if you don't want to have a ruffle neckline, or if you do like the ruffle, then you'll just use the full length of the pattern.
Okay, so I've got my two pieces cut out for the dress and for the sleeves. And next I need to cut out the elastic. So for the elastic pieces, we're going to need one piece for the neckline and then two pieces for the sleeves. So for the neckline, I like to use 1/2 inch wide elastic, and then for the sleeves, I like to use 1/4 inch elastic. So to get those measurements, you're just going to measure exactly where the elastic would sit. So for the neckline elastic, you're just going to put your measuring tape around your body like this, and mine is 39 inches, and then you're going to subtract 7 from that, and that'll get you the measurement that you need for your neckline. And then for your sleeve, you're just going to take your bicep measurement, roughly right above where your bicep is the biggest, so it's a little bit smaller than your full bicep. If you can imagine, that's where you want the sleeve puff to sit. That's where you take the measurement. So mine is 9 inches. For this measurement, you're just going to cut the elastic exactly at 9 inches. So to reiterate, for the neckline elastic, you're going to cut it out of 1/2 inch wide elastic, and you're going to take your around shoulders measurement and subtract 7 inches from that to get your finished elastic measurement. For the bicep, you're just going to take slightly above your bicep measurement and cut that measurement exactly as is, and that should be out of 1/4 inch wide elastic. And don't forget you have two sleeves, so you'll need 2 of the sleeve elastic pieces. So this is the 1/4 inch for the sleeves, and this is the 1/2 inch wide for the neckline. Everything's pretty much cut out now, so we're ready to get sewing. So the first thing we need to do is attach our sleeve elastic to the sleeve. And doing this first will make it a lot easier than doing it once it's attached to the dress. So if you look on your sleeve pattern, you can see this line right here. This is our stitching line for the elastic. So I'm just going to measure this line. So it measures 2 inches down from the bottom of the armhole. And I'm just going to measure that on both sides. And you can mark this using chalk, or I like to use my invisible marker. So this line is 2 inches down from the armhole, and I'm going to do the same on both sleeves, and then we're going to stitch this elastic onto the sleeve here. So when you're sewing this, you're going to have to stretch the elastic all the way and stitch through the center of the elastic, and I'll show you what that looks like. So to start, put your elastic right on top of that line there. And without stretching or pulling yet, just give it a few stitches and then backstitch. And then you're going to take the elastic, make sure you're keeping it straight, by the way, and find the end of your sleeve and align it there. You can pin it if you want. You might want to pin it several times because it's going to get a lot of pressure on it. And then you're going to pull this. Now you can either try to pin this down. I find it's just easier to hold it. And you might have a hard time seeing my purple line on this fabric, but I can still see it. And you're just going to begin stitching this down. I also like to increase my stitch length when I do this to about a 4 on my machine, because since you're pulling on the elastic, you're kind of making the stitches a little bit smaller. So if you loosen it up a bit, then it won't make these really, really tiny, tight stitches quite as much. And just make sure that you're pretty much stretching this the full length as you sew it so that it's evenly dispersing the elastic. And just keep checking to make sure that you're aligning it on your original marker line as well. Make sure you backstitch it at the end. And that's how you do the ruffle on the sleeve. So do that to both sides, and then we're ready to attach this to the dress. So to start, you're going to take one of your dress pieces. This can be either the front or the back since they're the same. And you're going to attach one side of the sleeve. And these are exactly the same shape, so just attach the two together like that. And you're going to do the same for all 4 seams. So the easiest way to do this is with a serger. You can finish all your seams this way, but if you don't have a serger, then you can just sew these seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then finish the seams off whichever way that you normally do without having a serger. So you may have noticed that on the pattern, the sleeve has a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And actually it has this 1/2 inch seam allowance on the dress as well. So depending on your serger, your seam allowance might be more like 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch, not quite a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the 1/2 inch seam allowance is not totally necessary since this is such a loose fitting outfit. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit smaller in the seam allowance. But if you are sewing this with a sewing machine and you're not using a serger at all, then you do want to sew it at a 1/2 inch because that'll just make it easier for you to sew neat seams. But if you're sewing it with your serger and your serger has 4 threads or 5 threads or enough to make a nice tight seam, one that's not going to fall apart, then you don't need to do an extra row of stitching with your sewing machine to meet that 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is totally fine as it is. So when you've got one side of your sleeves done, then you can take the other side of the sleeve and attach it to the other side of the dress. And then you're going to repeat the same process and sew it together here and sew it together on this seam. And then we'll have all the pieces totally attached. Alright, all the pieces are together now. So next is to attach the side seams. So we're going to do it in one long stitch line. So you can start from the top here. Make sure that you align your seams on the armhole. And you're just going to stitch this all the way down. And again, you'll want to do this with your serger if you have a serger, or you'll just stitch it with your sewing machine and finish off the side seams however you do that. And repeat the same thing on both sides. One thing to be careful of when you're stitching this is to make sure that you catch the ends of the elastic in the serger or the sewing machine when you're sewing so that those ends are securely finished inside of the stitch. And you want to make sure that they match up perfectly too to get a nice finish. Sometimes I'll even take a little bit more off with my seam allowance here just to be sure that I get that elastic caught in the seam. So I've got that seam finished on both sides. And one last thing I'm going to do before I turn the serger off is I'm going to do a stitch all the way around the neckline here to finish off this edge. So now the dress is pretty much done sewing wise. We just have to finish up our seams. We have the hem on the sleeves, we have the hem on the bottom of the dress, and then we have to finish off our neckline. So depending on how you want this to look, if you want it to have just a simple elastic casing with no ruffle, you're just going to fold this down according to the line on the pattern. So if you cut this right here on this line where it says cut here for no ruffle, then this line right here becomes your fold line. And if you left this as is, then we're going to fold it right here instead of cutting it right here. So if you're working with the pattern that you printed at home, then this line did not end up on the paper because it was not within the boundaries of the printer, at least on my printer. But for reference, this is going to be 1.5 inches down is where that line should have been, and that's going to be your fold line. So you can mark on your dress here 1.5 inches down, and that's going to be your fold line for the ruffle. So you can either mark this or you can just measure it with a ruler as you're ironing it. But we're going to take this to the ironing board and we're going to press this down, and then we're also going to iron out all of our seams here. So I've got that all ironed out all the way around the neckline, and that is going to be the foundation for my ruffle, or if you're not doing the ruffle, then yours should look a little bit shorter, more like that. And while you have your iron on, this is also a good time to iron out your hem, because that'll be the next step we're doing. So you can iron this out on your sleeve and also on the bottom of your dress. So to create the casing for the elastic and thereby creating this lovely little ruffle, we have to make 2 rows of stitching for the elastic to slide through. So the first row of stitching is going to be along the bottom of your seam allowance here. So I'm going to do it roughly 1/8 of an inch away from this edge. So you can start this anywhere on your neckline. I like to start somewhere where it's not going to be super noticeable, so usually like in the sleeve or like around this seam right here. And you're just going to sew pretty much as close to this edge as you can without slipping off the edge, so about 1/8 of an inch is a good amount. Make sure that you change your stitch length back to a normal stitch from left over from the elastic if that's the last thing that you sewed. Once you get to the end of your stitch here, this is back at the beginning where I started, make sure you don't sew all the way up to this because we need to leave a little space here to be able to slide the elastic in. So I'm just going to sew about to there, leave myself about 1/2 inch of a gap to be able to get in there. So on this side, we just have 1 stitch so far, and now we need to sew the other side of the elastic casing. So that's going to be 5/8 of an inch away. And you can start this stitch anywhere, it doesn't matter because we're going to go all the way around on this one. You're not going to leave a gap at the end of this one. And I like to stitch on this side because it's a little bit easier to see your original stitch line on this side versus here where it could be hidden in the serger threads. And you can either mark your stitch line here with an invisible marker or chalk, or if you did your math right and folded things correctly, then this should be exactly 1 inch away from the edge here. So you can also use this 1 inch seam allowance line on your sewing machine. And it's going to create a 1 inch ruffle, and then you're going to have 5/8 of an inch in order to slide your elastic through. So again, when you get to the end here, you're just going to sew it completely together. So now we have both sides of our casing done, and I'm just going to iron this so that I can set these stitches in before I put the elastic casing in. Now we can put our elastic in, and you're just going to find that hole that you left on the first stitch that we did. So the hole is right here. And then you're going to take your 1/2 inch wide elastic, and you can attach this to a safety pin, or if you have one of these things, these are really handy for pulling the elastic through. But a safety pin works just fine too. So you're going to thread it through here. And you just want to make sure that you keep the elastic straight while you do this, because if the elastic gets twisted, then it's not going to sit right on your neck. And you can already see that it's creating this lovely little ruffle. Just be careful when you're doing this that you don't accidentally pull the end of the elastic through the casing, otherwise you'll have to start all over. So something that I like to do is just pin this to the garment so that I don't accidentally pull it through. So when you get to the end, you can pin this together by overlapping it. And just make sure one more time that your elastic is not twisted at all. So when I overlapped this, I made sure it was going in the same direction. And if I go all the way around my neckline, I can just check and make sure that it didn't get twisted while I was pulling it through. Once you're sure of that, then you can stitch this together like this. I'm just going to stitch this back and forth a few times just to reinforce this. When that's sewn together, then you can just pull this through, and if you adjust your ruffle correctly, then it'll just slide right in. And now that that's in there, we can finish off the casing by finishing the stitch. I like to do it on this side. And just make sure that you don't catch the elastic. So kind of, push it up into the casing more. And then you finish that stitch. Once that's all sewn through, then you can just kind of give this a tug and it'll start to redistribute the fabric around the elastic. And just like that, we've got a cute little ruffle. So just a few more steps and this is all done. We just need to finish our hems. So if you've already ironed that, great. If you haven't, you want to do that now. And then we're just going to hem our sleeves and our hem of our dress, and that's that. So the hem has 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I like to do a double fold, so just fold it over a quarter and then another quarter and then stitch that down just like this. You can also do this with a rolled hem foot or pretty much any way that you prefer to do your hems. It's totally a matter of personal preference. So here it is, the finished dress. I made this for someone else, so the elastic measurements aren't going to fit me quite like they should. So I decided not to try it on, but you can see that it is pretty much the same front and back. It doesn't matter which way you wear it. I put a tag in mine so that I could tell the difference even though they're exactly the same. And there you go.
So I hope you found this pattern tutorial useful. This is my first time doing something like this, and I know that it's not like a professional pattern company releasing their patterns, but I just wanted to get something out there. So I hope that this was simple enough for you to be able to follow along and clear enough, and that my instructions were good. I'd love to share more patterns like this, so do give me your feedback on some other designs that you'd like to see. If you have any questions specifically about how to put this together or any suggestions, just let me know in the comments.